Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video you have my next episode of Recent Reads. I'm not calling it a vlog because I did not update once all week. It is now Sunday, end of a week, and I have 8 books to talk about. So this is not a vlog in any sense of the word. I don't know why I didn't update during the week. Various things I didn't feel like showering after my runs and then waiting to get for my hair to dry to do the update or to get ready. I did shower after my runs, but the whole fitting in the filming part of it, I just didn't end up doing it. Could I have updated on Friday? Yes, because Friday started spring break. It was a teacher work day, but I took the day off. I could have updated. Setting that aside, I'm going to go over the 8 books. Here they are. Well, one of them is not here because I read it on audiobook and it's an art copy. But anyway, I'm going to go over those 8 books. And then for next week, I have all of the week off because it's spring break. Yes, finally. I plan to get a lot read. And then the weekend, and I think it starts at some point on Friday evening or Saturday morning. I have to look into when Peace Talks actually start. And that's when you can earn an additional 10 points for your team for each book that you read. And I have pulled all of my graphic novels off of my shelf. I've pulled all of my Spy Family manga volumes that I have. I've been purchasing a lot of them, and I plan to read a lot of them over that weekend. So it would be a really long video to have the whole week when I plan to read a lot, because I have the week off, I should say, and then also the weekend. So what I'm thinking is that I'm going to make 2 videos. I'm going to have a vlog for the stuff during the week and then one for the weekend of Peace Talks. We shall see if I end up sticking to that or not, but that's the plan coming up. Hopefully I'll do really well this edition of Peace Talks, much better than I have in the previous 2, because the first time, for some reason in my mind, it was books that were the genre of my realm, which was polar fantasy at that time. And so I saved all my polar fantasies for that weekend, but they weren't short books, so I got 2 done. Let's get to the books that I read this week. And what I did, I've logged all of them. I've earned a lot of points this past week for Team Blood, and maybe my points that I entered later for the first full week of Realmathon helped bring us from 4th to 3rd, so we're not in great standing, which is why I'm so excited that I have spring break and I can read a lot to hopefully bump my team up. But anyway, I went through all of those points because I already had them logged, and I wrote myself little sticky notes on each one. I didn't write down each of the individual prompts, but I did write the total. The first book that I read is Descendant of the Crane by Joan He. I got a total of 53 points for this one. Some of the points were for the length. Then we have the team item, which is a person on the cover, and then more than 51% read. So that right there, I think, was 30 of the points. So in Descendant of the Crane, I realized when I picked this up that I have read 2 other books by this author. And those 2 other books are the ones we're meant to find, which was a sci-fi type book, and then Strike the Zither. Zither. That's a difficult word to say. Anyway, so I have read 2 other books. This is the author's first book. And one of the things that I knew when I read those other books is that Joan He had had some publishing issues with what was intended to be a series. This did well, but not well enough for the publisher to say, we're going to go ahead and greenlight the additional books in the series. And then something happened with her trying to get the rights back. I don't remember the details of it, but enough time passed between her writing this book and her getting the rights back so that she had moved on from the story. And I completely understand that. And that does affect a little bit the understanding of this book. In this book, you are dropped in right when it starts. And at first, I'm like, I know this is the first book because I thought it was a standalone, but it felt like I had missed a previous book in the series, and not in a way that I wasn't able to overcome, but it felt a little jarring at first. The action starts immediately. The main character, I think her name's Hasina, her father has died, and she believes that he was killed. And so she launches an investigation into this, and in this fantasy world based on ancient China, that leads to a whole bunch of other things happening. There was a war about 300 years before where these people had been defeated, and they were the magical people, the soothsayers, and the soothsayers themselves had been wiped out, or so they thought. Obviously there's some still existing, but there's this huge prejudice against soothsayers. This whole web of political intrigue ends up unraveling and then sucking in everyone into this web of machinations and all sorts of things. I was intrigued by all of those machinations, but at the same time, it felt like we would learn something, and then that something would be turned on its head, and you were meant to question that, and you weren't understanding it, and sometimes the connections didn't necessarily make sense, but then they did. It's complicated. Then at the end, you have a different perspective than what you've had for the entire book. And that perspective, it reveals so much, and that perspective has so many future plans. And when I knew that there wasn't going to be any other books, we weren't going to have any resolution to all of those other things introduced by that perspective, it's kind of disappointing because I'm like, oh man, this is never going to be resolved. So it left it on an interesting note, and I have put this through Compile. I can't remember what I rated it. I'm pretty sure it's 4 stars, but it could have been a whole lot higher. The problem with filming and all the lights on is you get warm very quickly. So it's less than a minute after I finished that previous recap, but I had to put on something cooler. Anyway, all right, so the next book that I have is The Scarlet Alchemist. This is my Fairy Loot edition. I like it a whole lot better than the traditional, I guess the US edition of these books. And what is interesting is I was reading both of these books around the same time. And they are both that at some point in ancient Chinese history. Not the same point, but there's a lot of similarities. But the magic system is very different. A lot of the stuff that's going on is very different. But it was interesting that I was reading this physically and this via audiobook at the same time. I never got it confused, but it provided an interesting comparison. I had a total of 20 positive points because all of the page number points are positive, and then the other points that I was able to earn were negative, and that was a negative 32, and I forget which realm I attacked. I haven't attacked very many. I think 4 of the books that I've read so far this month have been attacking. I just have gotten more points for defending. I also got person on the cover, that's the team item, and then more than 51% red. And I think one of the reasons that I chose attacking is one of the attacking points is team related word in the title, and Scarlet, Team Blood. So in this book, you have a very interesting magic system, and they're alchemists. And obviously with alchemists, you can transform something into something else. And it's a bit broader than what you would normally think of alchemy. And you have the main character, whose name I forget, Zilan. Her parents have both died. Well, her mom died, and she thinks her dad abandoned the family. She is half Chinese. Her dad was a foreigner, I guess Scottish, because it says Scotia. And so she doesn't look traditionally necessarily Chinese. And there's a word for it, but I don't remember how it's pronounced. But she lives with her aunt and uncle and her 2 cousins, who, I mean, she lives basically like there's good relationships between all of them. She considers her 2 cousins as her siblings. And they're reaching a point where they are going to take these tests to join the civil service. Her 2 cousins, the traditional civil service route, and her as a royal alchemist. Because she can do this alchemy magic, and she's really good at it. And one of the ways that they've earned the money to sit these tests is by bringing dead people back to life, which is one of the things that she can do with alchemy. Some of the magic in here is a little gruesome. Some of the things talked about are a little gruesome. The first part of the book really deals with them trying to get into, them trying to be part of the royal service, the civil service system that they have, for lack of a better word. There's a word that I was going for, bureaucracy maybe, but I forget what it is. Obviously, there's a lot more involved in everything going on than what first meets the eye. And I'm not going to give away anything else about the plot. I think a lot of that has to be discovered. She encounters someone very early on in the story who wants to hire her to bring someone back to life himself. And she's like, wait a second, you're still alive. Do you not realize how this works? But that person becomes very crucially involved in the whole deal with this plot. I'm really excited to read the second book and the conclusion of this duology. I might get the special edition if Fairy Loot does it. I might not. Haven't decided on that yet. But this is definitely a win. And this is probably going to be a 4.5 stars, or at the very least rated higher than Descendant of the Crane. Next we have one of my arcs. I did end up reading, I think, 4. I haven't entered that on my NetGalley yet, so I'm not sure what my percentage is, but it's almost to 80%. So that book is Like a Charm. This is definitely a book that I'm going to be purchasing a copy of for myself, because I don't know how well you can see this phrase here, but it says every story deserves to be told. And as soon as I read that, when I picked up this book and hadn't started reading the book itself yet, and I read that and I went, I think I'm going to like this book. And I was a little nervous at first because I'm like, what if it says that and I don't end up liking this book? Well, the fact that I'm going to purchase a copy for myself should tell you that I ended up liking this book. So the setup for this book, you have the main character, Ramya, right here. She lives in Scotland, in Edinburgh. She has dyspraxia, which is a type of neurodivergence where she struggles with some fine motor skills. The author herself also struggles with, or has dyspraxia, I should say. She also has a very complicated relationship with her parents. Her parents are news anchors and they used to live in London, but something happened when she was around 5 or 6 years old, where I think it wasn't a birthday or something. It was some sort of party and she had to go make an appearance as a young kid, and her grandfather was there, and there was also this person there that seemed very intimidating, very ethereal, and Ramya knew right away that something was different about this woman. And this woman gives her a command, tells her to go play the piano, and she's like, no, I don't want to do that. The woman is very surprised that Ramya doesn't do it. And eventually her grandfather does it. And her grandfather tries to share some information with them. But it leads in this complicated manner to a very loud, very angry fight between her grandfather and her parents, specifically her mother. The grandfather is her mother's father. And that is the last time that she ever sees her grandfather. So now they have moved to Edinburgh. They move fairly soon after that whole incident, and that's where her family is from. So they moved from London to there. She still doesn't have a really great relationship with her parents. She's really frustrated in school because they always make her be a part of these other classes that she knows that they think is supposed to help, but she always feels singled out for her dyspraxia, people thinking that she's dumb, that she's less than, but she also is starting to see some other different things. At the start of the book, besides that one incident, her grandfather passes away. And she's very sad about this because she never got to see him again. But she ends up going. Her mom is estranged from the entire family. She doesn't go. But through this incident, a whole new world starts to open up to her through a few things that happen in the story. At the funeral, I should say. And she ends up meeting up with her cousin. When she first finds out that her grandfather has died, both she and her cousin are pulled to the office to tell them about it. And from there, she develops a closer relationship with her cousin, who she hasn't really seen because, remember, her mom has been estranged from the family. It turns out that she has something called the sight, and she can see these different magical creatures. She finds a vampire at the library. She sees kelpies in the water. There's a few, she sees a holder at some sort of cafe or something. And that opens up this whole world where her grandfather has left her this book because he wants her to find out these stories and write them down. Hence this phrase here. But that leads to more things being discovered. This just felt like such a wholesome novel that's fantasy, but also dealing with real life. And it wasn't like fantasy trying to explain away or fix her problems, which was such a refreshing sight. So I really enjoyed this one. So the next book I'm going to talk about is the one that I do not have a physical copy of. It is an ARC, The Space Between Here and Now. I read it as an audiobook. And this is one of those books that is a slightly alternative reality. And in this reality, there's a syndrome that some people have. I forget exactly what it's called, but basically what happens to these people is different things, sights, smells, sounds, etc., will trigger the syndrome in them, and they will travel back in time to a memory. And they will literally physically travel back. So they will disappear from where they are and go back in that memory. And the main character has this. She, I believe, is a high school senior. She has had this happen a few times throughout her life, but she's also dealing with like regular high school senior type things and also some complicated family things, because when she was about, I think, 6 years old, her mother left the family. And her father was absolutely devastated by it and sort of withdrew into himself. And the relationship that she has with her father is not great. It's strained, you could say. And she wants to find out more about her mother because she notices that all of these different times that she gets pulled back, lately they've been about like memories to do with her mother. She ends up orchestrating this trip on spring break back to Korea, where her family is from, where her parents were born. Through that and through this memory syndrome, I forget exactly what it's called, she ends up finding out and discovering so much more about herself, about her father, about her mother, about her life in general. And it's this fascinating use of something that's fictional as a tool for her coming of age. And it's really intriguing because she has to look deep. She has to analyze different things, how she feels about different things, how she's going to deal with things, how she's going to interact with her father. And it is very, it's emotionally compelling. And I really, really enjoyed this book and how it ended up resolving the different aspects that she was dealing with. So I highly recommend that one. And I ended up with 41 points for that one. And I realized that I forgot to talk about the points for Like a Charm. I ended up with 34 points for this one. Did not get the cover color, but did get the cover item. And the space between here and now, cover color, cover item, and then some of those points were also page numbers. So the next one I read was also another arc. I did not get as many points for this one, only 26, because it was shorter and also not the cover color, but the cover item. The people on the cover. This one I thought might resonate more with me than it ended up doing. It was an intriguing study on some various things, and it's told with dual perspective with both of these main characters. They are best friends. They've grown up living not exactly directly next door to each other, but within close proximity. I forget what the male protagonist enjoys doing, but the female protagonist, she loves baseball. She has spent a month at baseball camp at the start of this book, and she's just made the boys baseball team, like the actual baseball team, not just the softball team. And every year they go on a camping trip, and it used to be just his dad, him, her, and her grandmother. But the year before, her grandmother died. And so she's still, trying to come to grips with that. Well, they end up going on the camping trip, but the camping trip, something that happens at the camping trip, ends up upsetting the entire plan that everybody has and forming the basis of this whole story. And something happens in the RV that they take on this trip where there is an explosion in the RV. He has gone to go do something, and the dad was off fishing, so she was the only one that was still in the RV, and she ends up really significantly injured. He's very forgetful, and he starts blaming himself because he thinks, what if I forgot to turn off the stove? And that caused the explosion. It turns out that he didn't, but that causes a rift in their friendship, and they are trying to rebuild that or come to grips with that throughout this story. And she's also trying to come to the grips with the fact that, she can't play baseball like she wanted to. And you'd think that there's a lot here that could potentially be explored and that would make this a decent, compelling book. But I just felt sort of mid about it. It didn't do anything wrong. It didn't do anything amazing either. It did well. but it just, overall, the vibes for me just felt mid for it. So ultimately, again, a lot of these I haven't put through a call pile yet. I have put through, Realmathon, but this is probably going to end up as a 3.5 stars. Then we have the one where I think I earned the most total points of 54, especially because it's a shorter book, and that is Promise Boys. So on here we have, I get all 3 of the bonus prompts: cover color, cover item, and also school setting. Some of these have had school settings, none of the ones that I've talked about so far, but that's another one of the bonuses. This book, I read as an audiobook, and that is the way to go with this because it's told almost like a true crime podcast. Now, yes, there are narrative portions, but before each section of it, you have like interviews, thoughts shared from various people, and they have different narrators, different vocal actors for each of those, not just for these 3 main boys. So the setup here is you have this, what's called Promise Academy, which is one of those, charter schools or private schools. I think a charter school would be the best description of it. It's supposed to help boys who are, quote unquote, down on their luck or who haven't gotten, the best shot in life have a shot. There's different academies, different schools that are supposed to be like this. And unfortunately, there's also a lot of stories of how that system has been abused. And the leader of this academy, he has become increasingly hardline and incredibly strict. Like the boys practically can't do anything whatsoever in this school. But at the start of this story, you find out he's been shot. He's been killed. And the 3 boys on the cover are the suspects because they were all there in detention. Apparently his office is very close to that, and none of them can be accounted for by anyone else, including the teacher leading detention, because he leaves to go find one of the boys who was taking a little bit too long in the restroom. This book is so incredibly compelling. It's short. The pace moves very quickly. I love the way that it's told in the audiobook. And a lot of times with different school setting books, I get a bit frustrated because I'm like, that's not how schools work. This one, I was so infuriated, not because it's not how schools work, but unfortunately because it's how a lot of schools like this are run and twisted, and the idea gets perverted and it doesn't end up actually helping the boys. Now, does it get a little bit melodramatic in how everything is revealed at the end? Yes, but this is a novel, so I'll give it to it. It didn't end up stretching too far past my suspension of disbelief. This is a phenomenal, phenomenal book. Then we come to the last of the arcs that I've read this week. I think I may read 1 or 2 more, but that is one of my Rick Riordan Present imprint books, and that is book 2 in the Sir Boateng series. And I will admit that at first I was a little nervous about this book. So first off, let me start off. I got 10 points for page number and negative 22 towards another realm, but I forget which one. I was a little bit apprehensive when I read the first book in this series because I've read another book by Roseanne A. Brown and really wasn't all that impressed by it. And when I started first reading the first book in this series, I also wasn't necessarily drawn in as much, but I enjoyed it enough that I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep going. And then I started this whole reading through every Rick Riordan Presents imprint book, and so I requested this book as an arc. Obviously, it's been published. Now, I won't talk a lot about specifics because it is, again, book 2. Brown goes somewhere at the very end of the first book. She did that, and I thought, how are you going to keep going from this? How is this going to end up being resolved? How are you going to move on from there and create this whole story? And then I read this. You did it. And you did it well. The way that Surwa has to battle between what she's always known, what she was raised as, and this whole new revelation that she has because of the events that happened at the end of the first book. Which side is the right side? Which side is the wrong side? It's muddied. No one side is completely correct. She's also not only learning more about herself, about her own relationships, about how she's treated her friends, about how she's treated her family. she looks and is starting to understand and learn about how people are shaped to be what they've become because of how they've been treated. And it's just a fascinating thing for Brown to have a middle grade age to protagonist analyze and study. And I cannot wait for the third book. This was very, very well done. Obviously, I'm having to be very vague because it is book 2 of the series. Speaking of second book in series, yesterday was another one of the 24-hour readathons as part of the Pokeathon, part of Jade from Jade Reads Patreon Pokeathon readathon. It's year long. And this one was slightly different in that it wasn't one of the gyms. It was what they're calling contests, where you have to choose a book for a prompt for a Pokemon that you've already read. And it has to be either the color of that particular gym or contest or ribbon or over 500 pages. And it really fit because the color for this ribbon was red. So I'm like, okay, I can still be competing for Realmathon, but also for this. And so I chose Heart of Flame by Nikki Palpretto. And this is obviously well over 500 pages, which is lots of bonus points page numbers wise for Realmathon. I got 30 points page number wise because this is over 600 pages. And I ended up with a negative 32 for attacking another team. I forget which one I did for that one. Now, I'm not going to go obviously into too much detail because again, this is book 2 in a series. And I read this all as audiobook, starting with my cross stitching. I did it based on UK time, which is when it officially starts. And then I also had my long run. And then I finished it in the afternoon after that. But I had mostly finished it via audiobook because it does help that I listen at faster than 2 times speed. In the first book, you have 2 sisters. You have Val and you have Veronica. This is, I believe, Veronica. That's my guess. In this, they are animages, but animages have been downtrodden and spat upon and thought terribly of because of what happened about 16 years before the start of this series. There was apparently a war with, I think I called it the Feather Queen, the Phoenix Queen, I forget what they were called. But it wrought terrible, awful devastation on the land. They were basically destroyed. If you're an animage, you are considered less than, you are often conscripted into service and treated basically as a slave, or you have to hide that you're an animage. And it's not that every single Phoenix rider was wiped out, but obviously they weren't. And it progresses from there. Because Val and Veronica have been trying to hatch Phoenix eggs, Val especially, and they have these 2 eggs. Only one of them hatches, and it bonds with Veronica, and Val is not happy about that. And that jumpstarts the whole process of this. In this series, you have multiple points of view. You have the point of view of someone who is a soldier in the Empire, but who's actually an animage and he's trying to hide that. You have the point of view of the son of the former commander who happens to be a Phoenix rider, and they were considered all died out. It's so complex. It's so immersive. There's all kinds of things that happen and have happened in the first book. And as I'm trying to talk about this, I'm realizing how difficult it is to talk about the second book in this series because so much of this second book is based on reveals that happen in the first book that it wouldn't be fair for me to talk about what happens in this book because it would give away so much from the first book. But the way that Nikki Palpretto built on what she established in the first book, it's phenomenal. I was sucked in. I'm not usually a huge fan of multi-perspective books, and there's a lot of perspectives in here, but I really appreciated what she did in this book, and I love this world and what she's building here and the type of magic system and the bonds and the relationships that are shown all throughout this. This is definitely a young adult fantasy series that I really enjoy. So there you go. There are all of the books that I read this past week, all 8 of them. Yes, that's a lot. And that was while I was working for most of the week, all but one of the days. We shall see how many books I get read this next week. The number might be more than a bit ridiculous. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.